So welcome everyone. I'm Carrie with the Tulsa Apartment Association and appreciate you guys being here for this great topic that a lot of us haven't probably put a lot of thought into yet. But electric vehicles and their popularity is rising. And so as apartment communities and property management, this is something that we need to be thinking about. So I'm excited to announce and introduce, some of you have met her at our luncheon meeting already, but Michelle Merchant with the Tulsa Clean Cities. And I'm going to turn it over to her and let her introduce everyone else that's with us.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon to discuss an exciting, hopefully an important topic at least, of installing EV charging at multifamily properties. My name is Michelle Merchant, and I'm the director of the Tulsa Area Clean Cities Coalition, which is a program housed at the Indian Nations Council of Government. You may know it as INCOG. It's a regional planning agency here in Tulsa. And Tulsa Clean Cities serves as the region's primary resource point on all topics involving efficient transportation. Today, our coalition is delighted to bring you some tailored information that's most pertinent to you as building owners and managers. Both Tulsa Clean Cities and Fourth Mobility have been partners on a 3-year project that is focused on understanding the barriers and opportunities of EV charging at multifamily properties in particular. So we're cutting right to the chase of what you need to know. We're going to save you some time and effort of your own research, and we're going to set you up for success in your future EV charging projects. So before we begin, I'd like to have our other presenters today offer a few introductions of their own. So Whit, if you could just introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Whit Jameson. I'm a program manager here at Fourth. We're a nonprofit based out of Portland, Oregon, but we work nationally and occasionally internationally on all sorts of electrification projects around transportation. Most often we work with electric vehicles and EV charging. So that's what I've been doing over the last almost 4 years now, and really enjoying it. So I guess over to Derek next.
Hello, I'm Derek Llewellyn. I'm a manager of meter infrastructure and programs with Public Service Company of Oklahoma here in Tulsa. So part of what my team, we work on as PSO, we're not in the EV business. We're not selling EVs. We're not in the charging business, but we're here as a trusted advisor of trying to help all of our customers if they have questions about EVs or charging, is just trying to provide information for them and any help that we can install. So, and I'll get that a little bit later.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. All right, so a little overview of what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to start us off, and we'll give kind of some overview info of EVs in general, as well as EV charging and the type of charging that we're talking about for multifamily properties. And I'm also going to give you some background on why you should think about installing EV charging at your properties. Then Whit is going to dig into the details a bit with some ownership and pricing models, key considerations, and as well as introducing the toolkit website that was developed through the project that I had mentioned. And then finally, Derek is going to discuss coordinating with your utility and the importance of that in any charging project. So we will have ample time at the end for Q&A. So please drop your questions in the chat or hold them until the end of our presentations. And we provided a copy of these slides to Carrie, and I believe she's going to send those out following this presentation. So no need to try and jot down all sorts of notes, just sit back and relax. And now to get started. So first, I'm just going to offer kind of just a brief overview of Clean Cities so that you guys know where this info is coming from and sort of what our motivations are behind this. Tulsa Clean Cities is one of more than 75 active coalitions in the National Clean Cities Network, which is supported by the U.S. Department of Energy and works to foster economic, environmental, and energy security in the United States by working locally to advance affordable, efficient domestic transportation fuels, energy efficient mobility systems, as well as other fuel saving technologies and practices. Clean Cities Coalitions accomplish this mission by building partnerships with public and private sector transportation stakeholders. And just as a note, we are fuel and technology neutral at Clean Cities. So we're not pro EV specifically, we're pro EV and pro propane and natural gas and hydrogen and all of the other types of alternative transportation fuels and technologies. So now I'm going to kick off the topic of charging by quickly covering what EVs are for anyone who needs this background. There are two types of EVs that tenants of multifamily buildings might have, and those are plug-in hybrids and fully electric vehicles, which is typically what we're referring to, the fully electric, when we say EV. Plug-in hybrids have all of the parts that you would see in a regular gas car, but they also have a small battery that allows the vehicle to run in an all-electric mode for certain periods of time. And fully electric vehicles, on the other hand, are quite different from what we see with gas-powered cars. They have a huge battery and a motor, which replace most of what we see under the hoods of our conventional cars. So it's kind of the difference there. So now this is the part of the presentation where hopefully I'm going to perk everyone's ears up. And that's because this is really the meat of why you all should be considering EV charging for your properties. So the EV industry has had strong growth year on year for the last decade, and that trend isn't expected to slow anytime soon. In fact, in August, Bloomberg reported that the US has crossed a critical tipping point that's been observed in 18 countries that are ahead of us in EV adoption. And that trend is that once 5% of new car sales go electric, adoption has been shown to skyrocket. So the Bloomberg report states that if the US follows this trend, we could expect to see 25% of new car sales go electric by the end of 2025. And some of you may be wondering, why are people buying EVs? And sure, there might be a lot of Tesla drivers that are Elon Musk super fans, but EVs, and especially the most affordable models, they just make sense on a personal finance level. And that's because between fuel and maintenance savings, EVs have a lower total cost of ownership over the lifetime of the vehicle compared to gas-powered cars. The cost of EVs are also expected to lower naturally as the market matures, making these vehicles more accessible to more households, which we're starting to see with the rise of used vehicles in this market, as well as tax credits in the used EV market. And so basically synthesizing this, EV adoption is growing fast, and we're also quickly exiting the early adoption stage of the market, as you can see here on the right. So for those of you wondering, if these stats are representative of Oklahoma, they are not necessarily entirely representative of Oklahoma, and that's actually because EV adoption in Oklahoma is projected to grow faster than the US average. So according to a report also released in August by the Fuels Institute, EVs in operation in Oklahoma are expected to grow 283% from 2025 to 2030. And that's some of the fastest adoption of any state. So we're basically within the top 5 or top 10 in projected EV growth over the next 10 years. That high projected growth is likely due to the low electricity costs that we have here in Oklahoma, meaning that fuel is super cheap for EVs. And we also have abundant fast charging stations along our interstates and highways here in Oklahoma that have already been built out. It's a great network of fast charging that we have in Oklahoma compared to most of the other Middle America states. But an important point is that fast charging stations along highways alone are not going to provide the support that are needed for all of the EV growth that we're going to see. And that's because 80 to 90% of EV charging happens at home. Home charging is the most convenient and affordable for EV drivers. If we all had gasoline pumped directly to our homes and work, we would fill up our gas cars right there, right? So that's exactly why EV chargers are charging at home or work. There's a lot of convenience in plugging in wherever you already are. So DC fast charging is typically reserved for use on long distance trips. And it's really whenever you just need a super quick fill up. So that EV fast, DC fast charging is basically what's at the top of this pyramid here. It represents, 10 to 15, maybe 20% max of the charging that EV owners end up using. And chargers will be an expected amenity at multifamily housing areas in the near future. And that's because people just charge where they live. So by now, I hope I've made a good intro case for why charging might be important for you as a property manager or owner. But here are a couple of testimonials from property managers who've completed installations. So you can see there are premiums that are coming from some of these properties that have done installations. So kind of summarizing what I've covered so far, why you should think about having charging at your property. Firstly, you'll attract and retain tenants that already drive EVs and are limited to only looking at the apartments and condos that provide charging access. You'll support current tenants that wish to purchase or lease EVs. You'll be demonstrating a commitment to sustainability. And of course, you'll be increasing your property values. So before we go any further, level 2 charging. This is the type of charging that we're talking about for multifamily buildings. Level 2 is the optimal charging type at all home and work locations. And that's because a full charge on level 2 takes between 4 and 7 hours usually for a full charge. And that's the optimal window for an overnight or workday fill up. Level 2 charging uses 240 volts. So single family homeowners with a dryer outlet in their garage actually have this type of charging built in. So you can understand how it's much easier for homeowners to make the switch to an EV, while for apartment dwellers, they're really prevented from owning an EV if their building doesn't offer charging. Moving a little bit further with level 2. So there's what's called networked or smart level 2 charging. And with this, it's really ideal for a use case where you have a commercial application. Maybe you want to have payment options so that you can receive some revenue from these chargers. Or maybe you also want to create a reservation system so that people can, reserve a time to charge. It's really good for shared charging like you would see at an apartment building. So if you are looking at installing charging, I would strongly consider looking at a smart charging option. And then lastly, there are some incentives that are available to offset the cost of EV charging. So hopefully this is also a great point that's of interest to you all. There are both state and federal tax credits that can be stacked together, covering up to 75% of the cost of your charging project. And for any properties that are within a mile of a major highway, you might be able to utilize some of the state's allocation of funding from the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, or what's called NEVI program. If you were to use those NEVI funds for your chargers or the state tax credit, those chargers would have to be open to the public. So that is an important disclaimer to make. So that might be a positive or a negative for you, depending on how you look at it. If you maybe you want to bring in extra revenue if you're installing those chargers and not a whole lot of your current tenants own EVs. So maybe that's a plus on one side, or maybe if you have a gated community and you really want to keep it just for your tenants, that could be a downside. So yeah, you wouldn't be able to keep them behind a gate, and that could be a drawback. Details on how the state is going to be using and allocating those NEVI funds are still being developed. So if you do have a property near a highway and you're interested in that funding, please let me know and I can sort of keep track on that and see if that'll be a possibility in the future. And lastly, funding for these types of projects has been growing. So please connect with me if you're interested in all at keeping up with the latest funding opportunities, and I'd be glad to send this forward to you all, making sure that it's all tailored for you so you're not getting irrelevant information on incentives. But that's really what we're here for at Tulsa Clean Cities. So please connect with me. We'd be happy to be a resource to you. And with that, I have finished my portion of the presentation and would like to hand it over to Whit.
Thank you. Let's go to the next. Perfect. So just let's take a step back there for a second. There's a lot of information there on charging, and I understand that's probably new to a lot of people. It's not as scary as it looks. And those features on that slide two slides ago are really important to, making sure people are actually able to use the chargers and you're able to recoup the cost of the electricity and potentially the cost of the charger itself. Hopefully the incentives can also help that return on investment as well. So part of this project, again, going back to the beginning, this is a 3-year project, DOE funded. This is the last few months of this project, but early on in the project, we looked at some of the barriers. Frankly, there's a lot of barriers to charging at multifamily homes. And you can kind of see them all listed out here. Well, it says this list is not exhaustive, and I second that. I have yet to find something that fits perfectly outside of any one of those barrier bins, is what I like to call them. So if you have any ideas on some barriers that might not fit in there, let me know, and we'll talk about it. So this is kind of a summed up version of each one of these barriers, and sort of we did interviews with electricians and property managers and kind of learned more about what people are seeing out in their day-to-day lives and seeing as a barrier. And this is kind of the HOA related barriers were the highest. It felt like most people were running into bylaw issues and stuff. But there's quite a few other barriers that, frankly, I think we can tackle in the next couple of years as an industry. And I think we're going to, the more you talk to people in the industry, the more you're going to realize that a lot of these barriers are coming down, and especially the ones around cost, with some of this money coming down from the federal government over the next couple of years. All right, next slide, please. So at the high level, there are a couple different methods for installing chargers at multifamily homes. One option is having a charger that is accessible to any tenant, any resident, and then they go back to their parking spot after they've used the charger. That obviously can be difficult in some situations, but for the most part, that makes a lot of sense. You don't need to install a charger at every single spot, which is quite a different method. So the second option is dedicated charging stations. So the charger basically goes along with the parking spot. So the person who parks there charges there. Basically, that's all there is. Whereas the shared charging stations, many different tenants are going to use those chargers, and potentially you can open them up to the public. So anybody that is able to access that parking location could use that charger. And then, of course, there's off-site charging that is generally independently funded and accessible to anybody in the public sphere. All right, so if you have any questions on that, write them down, put them in the chat. We'll talk about them later. Next slide, please. So going into that shared charging situation a little bit better, sort of a simple definition, it's going to require some sort of unreserved parking spot. So if that is an issue to you and your building location, then it may not be the best fit for your, that building. Energy use is generally tracked and billed through the charging station. And there's other ways to do that, but with the many different options for networked chargers that are out there, the ones that are connected to the internet in some manner, generally through cellular service, these chargers can all do that very easily. And then resident moves the car after they finish charging. Usually a lot of these charging stations have notification systems. So the person who's charging will get a notification when they're done charging, or when their time is up or some other metric. And then idle fees are basically fees that the charging station or the charging station service provider adds on to whatever cost of the charge to the charger, the person that's charging their car, if their car is still plugged in after they're done charging. Basically, it's an incentive to get them to move after they're done charging. Next slide, please. Alternatively, and you tend to see dedicated charging in places where people own their parking spot, so deeded parking spots in general. Power needs to be run to each space. Again, we mentioned it earlier, but chargers can impact the value of that unit because the charger is part of that parking spot, sort of an amenity for that parking spot. So it has value there. It has, you're gaining equity in your unit, basically. I won't go into any of these, but if you have any questions on any of the bullets here, let me know. We can go into them later. Next slide, please. The high level takeaways for multifamily homes is generally every building is different. Every parking situation is a little different. And that unfortunately means there's no cookie cutter mold. And it generally means you're going to need to engage an electrician to identify sort of, is there spare capacity? Is there spare capacity close to a parking spot? Understanding what the people living there actually want. Does anybody actually have an EV? Are people planning on getting electric vehicles in the next couple of years? If nobody's there and nobody's interested in getting an electric vehicle, probably doesn't make a lot of sense to install a charger at that point. However, one of the things that we have in the website toolkit, I'll mention it in just a little bit, is a survey to tenants that asks, are you interested in getting an electric vehicle in the next few years? So it allows for property managers to understand where we're going, where their tenants are at, and kind of plan for the future, for future installations potentially. And then specifically load management is a type of technology that can help manage how much electrical load is being demanded by the various chargers in a parking lot. And the benefits of that come at a higher scale. So the more chargers you have, the higher benefit there is to trying to manage that load so that, say, you don't need to install a larger transformer or something along those lines. And of course, bringing in your utility potentially as soon as possible if you do think you want to install enough chargers that it would be significant to your property's load. And by load, I just mean electrical demand. Yeah, next slide, please. So this slide has a lot of words on it. I want to apologize for that, but more importantly, from the apartment standpoint, you're probably going to be looking at more of the shared charger type, where you install one charger that's accessible to all tenants. We can talk about other situations if you want during Q&A, but for the most part, that's what we're talking about. Because the property management group or building owner actually owns the property, they're going to be the ones that are responsible for installation and potentially electrical service upgrade costs. How they allocate those costs, over time, that's kind of up to you, up to the property management group. Most people plan for charging some sort of upcharge on the energy to recoup that cost over time. All right, next slide. And this is sort of mainly here to reference in the future. It's way too many words for a presentation, but you generally don't see dedicated chargers, one charger per parking spot in apartments, and kind of makes sense. Whereas in condominiums, it's far more likely to see dedicated charging, where that charger being installed is actually adding value to the unit, to the property. And so electricity often will be billed through the charger, and the property management can generally control the cost of electricity and do an upcharge to recoup costs of installing the charger. Again, property management is responsible for maintenance. This is technically an asset on site. So generally, this is something that you want to factor into insurance. And I've had some conversations around that with other Clean Cities coalitions. Just because this is a new area for the industry, and you know, it has repercussions to other aspects of you know, businesses really. All right, next slide. And of course, there are offsite solutions in Oklahoma. You've got a wonderful DC fast charging network called Francis Energy. And they've got DC fast charging stations all over, mainly along major corridors, but all over the place. And you've of course got other charging stations around as well. So there are other options for tenants to potentially charge. If, say, you don't have any extra parking spaces and there isn't electrical capacity within easy reach, it might make more sense to not install a charger, understanding that tenants are likely to go to nearby chargers, say at like a grocery store. Theoretically, if your utility and your municipality are on board, or if you're in a location that's more rural and more flexible on what they can do with their streets, which aren't, you know, doesn't always overlap. Curbside charging can be possible. I've seen it done, especially in locations where you don't have large permitting departments or large amounts of bureaucracy that are going to slow down the process. So, you know, there are other options for tenants, but in general, coming back to one of the slides that Michelle talked about, tenants and residents are really going to want charging where they park. That's the easiest for them, and they're generally willing to pay for it. So kind of the high level takeaway there. Next slide, please. So all of this information and more is on the project website. It's called VCI-MUD.org. That stands for Vehicle Charging Innovations at Multi-Unit Dwellings. And this website's been created to basically help anybody that wants to learn more about EV charging at multifamily housing properties learn more. So next slide. And you can reach me at whitakerj@forthmobility.org. And of course, we got some time for questions right now after Derek goes. Next slide, and I think that takes us over to Derek.
Well, thank you, Whit. Just wanted to share is from PSO is we're working on microsite, and there's a QR code that you can request more information, and I'll talk a little bit about what's at that site. So if you have need any help around EV charging, the size of your facilities, please use that QR code. There's a form you can fill out, and then we can get the right resource to follow up with you. And it can be, like I mentioned earlier, we're not in the EV business. We're not here to sell EVs, and we're not in the charging equipment business either. But what we have done is partnered with ChargePoint on a referral program. So we can, if you haven't, it's one of the leading providers of different types of charging equipment that Whit covered. It could be network, non-network. They have a purchasing option, have a lease option, things like that. So if you would like information about a charging option, one of our customer service reps, if you fill out the form, they can follow up with you and give more information as a charging option. Again, we're not going to be selling that. We're not maintaining, but we can give you information, then get that referral over to ChargePoint. And ChargePoint, they do have managed or unmanaged. It is one provider. It is not the only provider of charging equipment. So Some things that we can also offer is, like Whit mentioned, if you have adding charging stations behind your house meter or something like that, we can come out and look at, hey, do you have adequate capacity on your transformer? Do you have to do any upgrades? Do you have to do anything like that? Or if you want to put charging in a different location, it may be more advantageous to put separate facilities in, put a separate meter in. And if you have a standalone meter, we are now offering some different rate options around EV charging. So there is some options for customers that we can walk through with you if you have more interest. So I just want to hit that at a high level, but if you want more information, like I said, the easiest thing is click on that QR code. It has more information on our website. We're working on another microsite with more information around EV charging and EVs in general. But we will fill out the form. We'll get the right person in contact. So, Michelle, I guess may turn it back to you. That's open any questions. That's kind of at a high level for PSO.
Awesome. Thank you, Derek. Yeah, and I really want to also hit at that point that, you know, you can't talk to the utility too early when you're looking at EV charging. It's especially if you're looking at installing multiple chargers. You know, I hope we were clear that level 2 is really the type of charging you want to look for. But certainly if there were ever an application for a fast charger, there's a whole lot of load you know, that can be added when we get into a significant number of level 2 chargers. So yeah, it's you know, as early as the construction phase, if you're looking at new development, that's a great time to include the utility in planning for EV charging. But certainly as early as you know you want to pursue it, I recommend the first contact to be PSO or your utility, and then also Clean Cities. So we have Clean Cities coalitions around the country, which you guys can obviously connect with me. I've got my info here. But if you know of other folks in other areas of the US that need a connection to a Clean Cities coordinator there to help guide them, please reach out to me and I can get you connected with that contact in another area too. But yeah, opening up the floor for questions.
So you guys feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand if you have questions, or if you aren't comfortable with that, you can put them in chat and we can answer your questions for you. And I have some questions while we're waiting for some questions to come in. I was curious, I am new to thinking about electric vehicles and charging stations, and so I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, Michelle, but are there places here in Tulsa that we can see this and what these look like and how they operate?
Yes, you can. So actually, I'll try to pull up a website here as I'm talking, but there are several charging stations. Like Whit said, the main charging provider in Oklahoma is Francis Energy, which is a Tulsa-based charging company. So we do have our hometown charging company providing over here. So a couple of locations that you guys could go check out. There's a station with several of those fast chargers, which is primarily the type that Francis Energy is involved in, that you can see at Caddy Corner from Boston Avenue Church here downtown. There are 4 DC fast chargers. The new Aldi location on Harvard, I believe it's near the BA and Harvard. There's another set of 4 fast chargers there. There are a few other locations. I know South Tulsa, I think maybe it's a Target or another grocery store that has several chargers at it. But the screen is still shared here. I want to point you all to a site that's maintained by the Department of Energy. So it's called if you go to afdc.energy.gov, is my screen still showing here?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Just making sure. If you go to this website and click on locate stations, this application gets updated regularly by Clean Cities coalitions across the country that are working to make sure that we have updated station information for all types of alternative fuels. But if you go into filters, you can sort by fuel type. So you can look at level 2 and DC fast chargers. You can pick the connector type. You can pick the network. So hopefully Francis is on here. Oh, there it is. And then you can click map results. And this is showing all of the chargers that are available. There are other apps too that you can, find if you want to. Plug Share, that's one of them. If you look up Plug Share, their website also has a similar map. But yeah, if you go to this site, this is the one I always recommend to folks to find some charging stations near them, and it gets updated regularly.
Michelle, I guess give INCOG a plug. There's also 3 fast DC chargers in the city of Tulsa where PSO's partnered with INCOG.
Yes,
and they're actually hosted by the aquarium, the gathering place at the Tulsa airport, and the lower level parking garage, and they're free fast DC chargers. So those locations have helped sponsor those, and they are free. And I think the gathering place, Michelle, also has a level 2 charger.
They do. Yeah.
It I think is also free, but there is those locations.
Yeah, actually, I should have mentioned those first because those are probably the easiest to go check out. So yeah, next time you're at the gathering place or the aquarium, go check out the charger there. So.
I don't know if you saw the chat, but I will read. There was a question in the chat of, do you have an estimated cost per charger or range for the install of chargers? So kind of looking at what an expected cost would be.
Sure. So Whit, I don't know if you have some numbers on this. When I am just throwing out general numbers, it depends a lot on, I guess, where the placement is of these chargers and what kind of electrical upgrades you need. So really those electrical upgrades are what tends to make the cost kind of snowball. So, that's the point where if, the earlier you can connect with your utility, the better, because they can help to lower those costs rather than you jumping into a project and realizing down the line that there are a lot of expensive electrical upgrades that could have been solved early on just by placing the charger in a better spot. So for a commercial charger that a commercial level 2 charger with that shared capacity, my estimate off the top of my head is between $8,000 and $12,000 per charger. But Whit, did you have any numbers from your side?
Yeah, so that 8 to 12 is somewhat around what I've seen, but that includes hardware. So generally hardware, I've seen commercial level 2 chargers. That just means 240 volt AC power. Tend to go for between, I've seen the absolute low end, like $1,500, and as high as $4,500 if you're much outside that range on a per port basis. Let me know. I can connect you up with some other folks to get you quotes.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, especially right now with the supply chain constraints, I think I've been seeing a lot around that 3,000 mark. That 1,000 mark is going to be really on the low end, or 1,500. Generally, you're missing something, or rather, you're not missing something, but the charger is missing some feature that's really important at that level. And then install, the $5,000 average is pretty reasonable. The fewer chargers that you do, the higher per port charge cost it's going to be. The main things that I always say for people on, you want to figure out if it's going to be cheap on the cheaper end or more expensive end. How close is the panel? Do you need a panel? Do you need to trench into under pavement? How deep do you have to trench? And all that kind of factors in. And it kind of makes sense. Do you have to go through a wall? Do you need to increase the service? Do you need a new transformer? All of these, specific questions lead to understanding the cost a bit better. And I've seen commercial installations happen for even less than $1,000. on a per port basis. And I've also seen one that was incredibly expensive, where they had to put in a meter, a panel, trenching under concrete, ran it 50 yards, all that jazz. And that was very expensive. So it really does depend on the situation. And I go back to that slide that says every location's different. You're going to want an electrician to review it. And of course, you need to get your utility involved. If it's more than, if the electrician comes out and says, we've got multiple spots on this panel in your parking lot, and we're going to hook up the charger 10 feet away, you're probably talking about $1,000 install, maybe even less. If you're talking about running conduit across the wall for 100 yards, you're probably talking 5 to 10 grand, because electrician time is expensive. I think we actually have an electrician on the line.
But this is Derek with PSO, and I would agree is what we're seeing from charging. It depends on what you want to do. If you want to have a dedicated charger per spot, like Whit mentioned, those are going to be dumb chargers, and they're going to be fairly inexpensive, $500 to $1,000 for a commercial. If you want to have network capability and things are managed to the cloud, you can charge for the end usage or manage, or if they're out in the middle of a parking lot and you want to manage who gets to use those chargers, those are going to be more expensive because you're providing a lot of software and a lot of flexibility within the device. Is you could have charge the end user that uses those so much per minute or so much per usage when they just slide a credit card or they use a mobile app. Or you can even have, like, an apartment owner is, okay, I'm putting an extra $25 or $50 on your bill, but you get a free PIN number, and then you just put your PIN number in and use that charging station anytime you want. So it just depends what level on the hardware. If you want something very simple, not a lot of control, or if you want something more complex, give you a lot of flexibility and ability to maybe recover costs, there are going to be more expensive. And there is options where you can purchase the equipment. There's also options where you can lease the equipment over a 5-year or 3-year period of time. And it's just a monthly or annual fee with those type of. So there's different options.
Yeah. One last point I'd like to make while we're on this topic is Derek mentioned that PSO has a partnership with ChargePoint. And ChargePoint is a great company. So they, that might be the best deal out there. I'm not quite sure, but if you all are interested in looking at other possible charging companies, just to get multiple bids, Tulsa Clean Cities has tons of connections with other charging companies, and we'd love to assist you with that.
I'd add for the ChargePoint, their products are generally pretty premium. They have basically all of the features you're going to want and more. So usually my rule of thumb is get 3 quotes. ChargePoint's always a good one. They've got salespeople all over the place, whereas a lot of other companies just don't. But if you want to compare a bunch of different quotes, ChargePoint is not only a really good one to start with, they're also going to walk you through the steps. And they really know what they're talking about. Which is honestly one of the reasons why I really like ChargePoint. But they do come with a price premium.
Yes. Yeah.
They do. So
but I agree with you. And we have that partnership. So if you click on the QR code, we can have one of our representatives come out and talk about ChargePoint at a high level around some of the things they offer. If you want to get a quote, we're going to refer you on to ChargePoint, and then they'll give you a quote and they'll give you more details. But we can come out and talk at a high level about ChargePoint. And they're not the cheapest solution, but they are very robust and probably now the leaders in charging and the network they provide. So it's just a choice, and that's what I would just say is just they are an option. Doesn't mean they're the best option for you.
So I saw in the questions, there's a question about anyone to recommend get a hold of to come out and do an audit on our property for best locations and how many. So that came from Josh. So I just wanted to share, we do have Bridgepoint Electric on our webinar today, and they're a member of the Tulsa Apartment Association. Unfortunately, his microphone is not working, so I told him I would share this information that they've installed many charging stations around our area, and they mentioned they've also done some for the Francis Energy. So the company's Bridgepoint, they're a local member of ours with the association, and I'm going to share their where you can find them in our supplier member directory on the chat. So if you guys want to look them up and reach out to them. But if you guys, the EV experts on the call, if you have any other advice on who to contact for that kind of consultation.
Yeah, well, from our side, sometimes I get requests just from folks who find Tulsa Clean Cities on the internet, that are asking similar questions like, how many chargers do I need? Usually it's something like a restaurant that's looking at putting charging in. For multifamily properties, probably the first step I would say would be to check out this toolkit website and just take a look at the resources that are there for maybe determining on your own how many chargers might be a good fit for you. It's going to depend a lot on the need that's existing within your group of tenants that you have, and what the drive is there for EV adoption. So starting with a survey or something similar, just to kind of see maybe how many chargers might fit to that base that's actually demanding charging at this point, or might be interested in it in the future. You could definitely reach out to me at the same time, and I'd be happy to help you kind of facilitate some of that. So and then when it comes to looking on the property, I do I can do an informal look around the property to look for, the right types of spots that it might be able to go in, but definitely an electrical company or the utility is really who is going to be the end all be all when it comes to recommending a spot for your chargers. So that definitely fits in with that utility component. I definitely recommend them being the first folks to contact, but certainly I'm interested in getting in touch with this Bridgepoint provider too, so that I can add them to my list of folks to recommend to people for the electrical work. So.
I'm not seeing any other questions, but of course I have another. So in the apartment community world, already there is some concerns about apartment communities making revenue on utilities like the electric. So when they build back residents, you have to be very careful about not making income on that. So I'm curious if you guys have heard that, or if this has been segmented out to be very separate from that utility component, and what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it has been separated from, so once you have a charger that's installed, that's like a pay for use, it is like, I believe it separates that issue, so that you're not, the power that's discharged through a charger would not be under the same restrictions as that utility energy usage.
And Carrie, from PSO, we can come out, and it just depends how you want to connect the charger. If you want to go through the normal billing or the normal meter for the apartment complex or condo association, that's one thing. Or if it's better to set a separate, completely separate meter that serves electric infrastructure, and that may give flexibility on the how you charge, if you want to charge for the energy usage, or how do you want to do that. There's some different ways that that can be done.
Thank you.
And I know this wasn't the question asked, but sometimes it makes sense to have the rates be pretty high to recoup the cost of the installation, but also recognize that if the price is so high, the tenants are probably just not going to use the charger at the location. they'll go somewhere else to charge if the price at their home is really high for them. So people are good at optimizing their economics. But yeah.
So that leads me to another question is, as an electric vehicle owner, what do you pay and how is that measured? Like if you were going to be paying for a charge, what does that look like and what's a typical amount that you pay for your vehicle?
So at the residential level, you know, it's whatever you're paying, kind of just like your regular energy use, usually for single family homeowners, that is just the typical rate, which is around 10 cents per kilowatt here in Oklahoma. But, you know, and I guess that can change slightly with, I guess, Derek, maybe you want to cover the different pricing kind of mechanisms that you guys can offer that have to do with load. So I will say a couple of remarks on, you know, you got that home charging that's sort of like the cheapest, you're just plugging into your wall. Level 2, there might be a slight premium on that, just so that the owner of that charger can recoup some costs. Typically, they're not making crazy profits or maybe even profit at all. Maybe they're slightly breaking even or getting close to breaking even, but on level 2, there's not a whole lot of an upcharge. So, you know, it's not crazy expensive to charge on level 2, but more than that 10 cents per kilowatt. And then on a fast charger, you really are being charged a premium because you know, the equipment is super expensive and the delivery of that power is very fast. So it tends to be more expensive. And I think that the high end that I've heard on a fill up at a fast charger is like, you know, $15 or $20. That's a very high end. So yeah, that's just kind of an example, but Derek might have other comments.
Yeah, Michelle, you hit upon, there's a lot of options of how you want to charge for the energy usage. If it's like a condo where they have their own electric meter, we offer a special EV home charging rate, which is a super low if they charge at night, which most people will. It's a really cheap rate. It's going to be, Michelle's probably ordered like 7 cents if you charge at night, which is maybe or 5 to 6 cents. So it's going to be significantly cheaper, but that's just for an individual house or residential. If you have a dedicated meter for a large number of charging stations at an apartment complex, we actually have an EV rate that's a non-demand based rate, and it's a fixed charge. And so it's very easy, depends upon what type of charging station you want to use. Do you want to use a network where you can then program that device of that rate and recover the cost? Or if you just want to have just an allocation cost. So there's different ways in complexity and cost, just depends what you want to do with it. I mean, we could spend, probably Whit and I could probably spend half a day talking about different how would you bill customers and different options. And it's really how you want to do it. But we offer some different rate plans to make it very simple to know what the energy costs are.
And another thing, especially with ChargePoint, you can, as a customer of theirs, you can ask them, what makes sense for me to charge my tenants to charge at this charger that we've just installed, and that they'll be honest with you. They'll say realistically, if you're trying to recoup your costs, you need to bill this amount based on this amount of utilization. One thing somebody said earlier in the presentation about how if your charger is somehow open to the public, that's probably going to increase the amount of utilization the charger is going to get, which is going to decrease the amount of time it's going to take to get that return on investment. However, it might make it less useful, less valuable to the tenants that live there. So there's trade-offs, but at the same time, it's something that's worth considering. And if you ever have questions, after installing chargers, you can always go back to the company that you bought the chargers from, or that you're doing a lease agreement with. And of course, you know, if you want, you can reach out to Michelle or myself. I'd say go to Michelle first because she's your local contact. And if Michelle's got questions, you know, you can come to me and can come to other people that you know. Clean Cities Network is vast.
You just brought up something that I was going to ask as well. Do the charging stations have to be purchased or can they be leased? Because I know in the apartment community world, some apartment communities, you know, lease or rent their laundry equipment for their laundry room. So I was curious if that was an option when it came to the charging stations.
Yeah, it is an option. A lot of companies are offering that now, and Derek was saying that ChargePoint's one of those. So yeah, off the top of my head, but I think most companies, just in order to be competitive, are offering those options these days. So.
Recently, there was a fleet RFP from the city of Portland that basically said, hey, the city doesn't want to put any money into chargers up front. And they got a bunch of different responses from tons of different companies. And you know, part of that is we do have a clean fuels program out here in Oregon. So there's a greater incentive to just dispense electricity through charging. Enough of that. But there are options. There's charging as a service where, you know, you pay a monthly cost for the service to be provided. There's another option generally that is the charging station owns the chargers, they install the chargers, they pay for everything basically. And then you have a fixed contract for, you know, say 10, usually the charging companies want it to be in the ground for a long time, usually 10 to 15 years is what I've seen in contracts. And then they'll set the charging rates, which is a pro or con, you know, is what it is. But that's another way to kind of get around the capital constraints and put it towards operating budget. And that can be a really good option for a lot of people. The other thing to keep note of is a lot of these contracts where you don't own the chargers will have some sort of revenue sharing agreement. And that's something to just be aware of and you know, make sure that you're getting a good deal. And that's one of the other reasons why I'm always like, you want multiple quotes, because if one company is saying the revenue sharing agreement is, you know, the host site gets 90% and the charging service provider gets 10%, and another quote gives you, you know, 5% versus 95% to host site, you know, you can use that to kind of leverage the companies back and forth and get a better deal for yourself. And that's certainly one reason to get multiple quotes. Another, just to make sure, you know, one contract's not ripping you off entirely, is to just see another contract. And it's something I know the multifamily housing industry's been doing a long time in the service industry. You've got a lot of different services that you provide to your tenants, and this isn't new. It's just a different technology.
All right, well, I don't see any more questions. Michelle, do you have any closing remarks for us?
No, not really. Just would definitely encourage everybody who's interested in charging for their property, or would just like to chat more about it, and, you know, kind of keep my email for future reference whenever you are interested in getting started on a project. Please do reach out. I'd be happy to talk with any of you, meet for coffee. You know, we're really just here to be a resource to the region, and to connect you with all of the in-depth answers that we got here today from Derek and Whit. Thank you to you two for joining us today, and offering your expertise. Really made this a great presentation. And thank you to everyone on the call who has taken the time out of their day to learn about this. So I hope it was of value, and appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you guys for being here. In case you're not aware, we are recording this. And so if you want to share this information with colleagues or other people in your company, you'll definitely be able to do that. We will share the link to you guys since you attended and registered along with the slides. And then also we'll post on our website so anyone can access that way as well. And I know for me, I was not aware of this electric vehicle world, and seeing Josh post that one of his friends only spent $300 for his vehicle for an entire year is definitely appealing. So thank you guys, appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.